looked at the teachers, who nodded and left. So now I was left alone with the principal. Could he be trusted? The teachers were witnesses to the pulled fire alarm last night, so it made sense for them to be here this morning. The fact that the principal had police information on me was highly suspect, though. For the moment, I denied trust and had to think of an amazing lie. Well, I said, the other kids are really mean to me, so. So what? Asked the principal. So. I stalled until I thought of a plausible lie. I tried to kill myself. What? The principal was genuinely alarmed. Here's where I tried, I said, pointing to where the glass had cut me during yesterday's escape. I used glass shards from a broken Coke bottle. This is very serious, said the principal. Please don't tell anyone, I begged. I just get so sad sometimes, and I don't want the kids to know that their teasing really gets to me. I can't ignore this, said the principal. I have to phone your parents, and you'll need to see the school nurse to discuss what to do next. I'll tell the coach that you'll be absent from practice today, and we'll meet with a nurse right away. I had come up with a rock solid alibi, but now there was no way I would be without adult supervision, meaning I had no way to check up on the tortured girl and see the three sadistic teachers. Wait, I pleaded, scrambling for another lie. Track is the only thing in my life that makes me happy. Please don't make me miss track. The principal appeared skeptical, but said, Okay, in the interest of professionalism. So my mom came in, and we sat with a school nurse to discuss psychiatric treatment for my suicidal tendencies, and did nonsense picture worksheets and how I could best deal with my problems and emotions. I was excused from class for the day, but track practice was cancelled because most of the track team was away again. It seemed weird that they would be away again, but since I'd missed class, I didn't know what the reason was. I had no reasonable excuse whatsoever to be at school after hours. Come on, darling, said Mom. Let's go to the movies, and then we'll have some pizza. Hold on, Mom. I better grab my history book so I can study. I'm coming with you, said Mom. You can't, I lied. Give me one good reason why not, she said. She thought her child was suicidal, so her behavior was sadly validated. What if the other kids laugh at me? I said. Mother started to cry and said, Please come back, and didn't hug me in case the other kids saw. I felt really bad for lying to Mom when she was clearly worried about me, but I needed to at least check one more time for anything fishy that might be going on at the moment. School was in session, and it wasn't even lunchtime yet, so I don't know what I expected to find. But then I saw her, the tortured girl. She was walking to the school's bathroom by herself. Her posture was solemn, her head was pointed to the ground. Her stomach must have been somewhat intact, and she didn't see me until I spoke to her. You have to come with me, I pleaded. Who are you? She asked. I'm the one who pulled the fire alarms. I was trying to save you. Whatever they're doing to you, we have to tell the police. She silenced me immediately and scribbled furiously on a notepad. It was all the police's idea, and now that they know someone knows, they're going to speed up the system. They've already started on two other kids. They can hear everything I hear and say, it said. What are they doing? I whispered. Before she could answer, we both saw one of the sadistic teachers looking right at us. The teacher took great strides to walk towards us. The tortured girl excused herself to the washroom, and I ran back to where I left my mother, hugging her tightly like I was suicidal, and watching the teacher walk past us nonchalantly. The movie was boring and the pizza was stale, but I had to give my mother credit for trying. She didn't even smoke up that night. She just tried to engage me in card games and ice cream until it was time to go to sleep. I didn't sleep. If the police could hear everything the tortured girl was saying, I can only imagine the terrible price she's paying right now if they found out how much she told me. It wouldn't take long for the teachers to tell the police that I'm the one she was talking to. So I'm surprised I'm not dead or arrested until they don't consider me a viable threat. I'm just a kid. Who's going to believe me? I'm also suicidal, according to my school papers. So anything I say will just be considered some psychological nonsense brought about by my non existent depression. And it's nearly time for me to go to school again. What should I do? My next psychiatric evaluation would be in the nurse's office, and for legal reasons, one of my parents had to attend. My dad was doing business on the other side of the world, so my mom attended. They asked me questions about my relationship with my parents, with my peers, with teachers, what I enjoyed in my spare time, and if I had any fears about anything at all. They were all very interested in my fears. They recommended a couple of weeks away from school and repeating the term. The psychiatrist asked me some more questions about my nightmares and told my mother not to worry about my academic future. There's no shame in repeating a term. Kids do it all the time. Repeat the year if you have to. School gave me the rest of the day off to consider my options, but I was feeling useless and powerless. If I was away from school, I would have no way of monitoring the sadistic actions carried out on my fellow students. I didn't know what I should do next, so I confided in my mother. She is stoned in nearly all of my memories of her. She isn't neglectful, but she's pretty lazy, and more often than not, she makes foolish decisions in light of really obvious options. However, her love for me has never been in doubt, and in this desperate time, she was the only person I could talk to without fear of death or torture. Darling, if there's anything at all you want to tell me, I'm ready to listen, said my mom as we were driving home from the evaluation. I had no choice but to assume our house and car were bugged. Was I being rational or paranoid? Mom, I know we haven't had lunch, but I'd really like a milkshake, I said, trying to sound mildly pathetic with a touch of ironic tragedy. It worked, and we went to a diner where I told her the entire story of everything I'd seen and done. The sight of the girl attached to weird machines while sadistic teachers dissected her abdomen. How I'd pull the fire alarms, thinking it would save her. How the school had tried to lock me in, and how I escaped by breaking a window with a fire extinguisher. How I'd overheard the firemen assisting the sadistic teachers on how to proceed with their operations. That the sadistic teachers may have recognized me. That I had a brief encounter with the tortured girl, and she told me that the whole thing was the police's idea. That I had told her that I pulled their fire alarms before learning she was bugged. Mother gawked at me and asked if I was high. I told her I wasn't. She asked if I was lying. I told her I wasn't. Once she accepted I was serious, she became hysterical, and I had to work really hard to calm her down so she wouldn't draw any attention to us while she sobbed about pulling me out of school and moving out to the country. We can't, Mom, I replied. What about the kids getting tortured right now? Darling, said Mother, I know it's hard, but sometimes when you know people are suffering and there's nothing you can do, you have to move away and save yourself, or you'll just become another casualty. The world is cruel and terrible. Maybe we should contact the police from a different city, I suggested. They'll ignore us, report us to our own police, and we'd be apprehended, said Mother. What about the Secret Service or foreign nations? I asked. I'm a pothead pixie, and you're a suicidal loony. They'll never believe us without proof, said Mother. Like a video or a photograph? I suggested. My mom became outraged, but thankfully kept her voice down. Why on earth are you so concerned about saving a group of vile, terrible children who are always horrible to you? They force you to drink toilet water. Have you wondered if this torture might be too good for them? If it was me, I'd want someone to save me, I replied. She thought it through and said, You're right. So, we came up with a plan. Well, mostly my mom came up with a plan. The school already had it on record that track practice was necessary for my mental health, so the teachers couldn't think strangely of me running laps, even though I hadn't attended classes today. Mother pretended to be the bored mother so she could wander the school and eavesdrop on what she could, hopefully capturing evidence on her mobile. I showed up to practice wearing my running clothes, and there were only 5 of us. Coach pulled me aside and said to me, The principal told me what happened. If you need someone to talk to, you can always talk to me. I have one question, Coach, I replied. Where is everyone? I don't know, said Coach. I was told they were all sick. Practice was uneventful. Against my personal safety, I showered at school, but the mean kids were sick, apparently, so nothing frightening happened to me this time. After I was all clean, I waited around for Mother. A half hour later, she still hadn't shown up to our meeting spot, and Coach refused to leave me until I had left the school safely. I told Coach that I would look around the school real quick, just to see where my mom had gone. But Coach wouldn't leave my side, so I had no opportunity to snoop. On the way to my locker, we crossed paths with one of the sadistic teachers who I had seen torturing the girl. I'm relieved to see you're well, the sadistic teacher said to me, though I am surprised to see you at school. The psychiatrist said that track was essential to my mental health, I said. I thought track practice would long be over, said the sadistic teacher. The poor kid's mother got lost, laughed Coach. We were going to find her, then I'm going to watch what's left of the match. What are you still doing here anyway? It's amazing how pupils think a teacher's work hours are the same as theirs, replied the sadistic teacher, and Coach thought this was clever work humor. Mother was nowhere in the school, and when I checked the parking lot, I saw that her car was gone. I freaked out on the inside. Had she been apprehended? What were they doing to her? Would they torture her to find out what I told her? Would they hook her up to the weird machines and dissect her stomach like they did to the tortured girl? Could she have ditched me? Absolutely not. Mother can be a waste case, but she would never abandon me. Where's your mother's car? Asked Coach. It's gone, I answered. Coach thought of the right words to use in a situation where a suicidal child's mother had buggered off. Your mother, she knows, right? Oh, yeah, I said, and then I told a pathetic lie. I told her I needed my space and that she was being a cow and she left. I forgot about that. My mind's been swimming lately. Coach did not seem convinced. Well, if that's the case, I should just drive you home. It's no trouble at all. I didn't know if I could trust the coach. For the moment, I had to assume that all teachers were not to be trusted. No thanks, coach, I said. I'd rather walk home. Coach, either being genuine or acting, put on the presence of a responsible adult. I can't let you do that. I'm sorry, but I just can't. So I played along and said, Okay, I know you're just doing your job. Can I use the bathroom first? Coach said that was fine and went to start the car. I stalked the halls one more time, checking for my mother and any signs of tortured children. Only there were none, and I left school via the rear exit and escaped into the woods. I slowly and quietly made my way home, only to see 3 police cars in my driveway. What were 3 police cars doing there? Had Coach phoned the police following my disappearance? Did this have anything to do with my mother? The police were walking in and out of my house as though they owned the place, and mother was still nowhere to be seen. They confiscated our home computer, all our telephones, and several electronics that I couldn't imagine would be necessary for police work, including mother's electric toothbrush. The police also found mother's stash of weed and excessive paraphernalia. Any sign of the kid? One of the police asked. Not yet. We'll have to keep waiting, said another one of the police. My house was no longer safe for me, and I was worried sick about my mom, as well as scared for what might happen to me if the police found me. I snuck back to school on the off chance that mother might have actually returned. There were still cars in the school parking lot, but not my mom's. Who could the teachers be torturing at this late hour? Surely the students' parents would phone the police. Not that it would make much difference, but the police would still have to act their part and safely deliver missing children, lest the parents go to the media. Who was at school so late? And where was my mother? If I'd never told her what I had seen, she wouldn't be missing right now. She wanted to keep me safe by going as far as possible from the source of the trouble, and now she had been made a liability. I crept to the school doors, but they were locked. The best I could do was watch from a tree in the woods, watching to see who owned the cars. Unfortunately, I fell asleep, and when I woke up, the cars had gone. It was nearly daylight, and I didn't want to be near school when school began. I don't think anyone saw me. If they had, they would have dealt with me. For the moment, I'm hiding in a public library, keeping a low profile and typing this. I'm too scared to return to school. The moment I step foot on school grounds, the police will apprehend me and ask me several questions they already knew the answers to. I wanted to get a hold of father, but I don't have his mobile memorized. And what would I tell him? That mother's maybe been abducted, and that I'm too frightened to go home due to police surveillance, and that he can't help he's on the other side of the world. Not to mention, what if they've begun monitoring his phone? If I call him, they might be able to trace where I'm calling him from. Scared out of my wits' end. I don't have anywhere to sleep safely, and I don't know where my next meal is coming from. What should I do? I woke up later than expected, the sun shining in my face through the only bedroom window not covered by a blind. Had Herbie not cried since... when? I sat up slowly and picked up the baby monitor. It was on, and I could see the black and white image of his crib, his small form still beneath the blue blanket my mother had given him. I began to feel uneasy as I thought back to the night before. I remembered putting him down at 11 and then checking on him at midnight before heading to bed, but usually he would wake me up between 3 and 4 and again between 6 and 8. I looked at my phone. It was 10:15. Had he really slept through the night for once? Or had I slept through him crying? Or was something wrong? Pulling back the sheets, I jumped up, my heart pounding in time with my steps as I ran down the hall to his room. The house was so silent, and when I went into the nursery, the instinct that something was wrong just grew stronger. The room felt empty and cold. I looked over into the crib. I was reaching out to pull back the blanket when I stopped myself. I could already see the rise and fall of his chest, and his face was unblemished by discomfort or bad dreams. He was sleeping well and peacefully, and here I was, about to wake him up instead of being grateful for a few hours of peace. I was about to ease back out and go make some coffee when I heard a funny little snoring sound. Herbie had never snored before, though I guess there was a first time for everything, especially with a 3-month-old baby. Still, I felt a new twist of worry. What if he was getting sick, and that wasn't a snore? It was a wheeze. Wincing at the idea of disturbing him, I gently pulled back the blanket and picked him up. He didn't stir, his expression not changing from the placid mask of someone lost in deep slumber. This worried me more, as he normally woke up as soon as I touched him, but I held my fear in check as I eased him to my shoulder and put my ear to his face. It didn't sound like a wheeze, but it wasn't a snore either, exactly. It was a thinner, more rhythmic sound that grew quiet and then louder, but was always there. Still thinking about congestion, I lifted Herbie up a bit and put my ear to his chest. The sound was clearly here, a whirring thrum that seemed to vibrate from somewhere in his core. That wasn't right at all. I needed to call the doctor and carry... That's when I felt the hard place on his back. My fingers had just brushed it, but the wrongness of it was immediately obvious. Under his onesie, right in the middle of his back, was a long, flat hardness that was cool to the touch. What was that? Laying him back down on his stomach, I pulled the onesie down as my breath caught in my throat. It was a coin slot. A metal coin slot, like one you might find on an old-fashioned machine at one of those antique arcades or fairs. I reached out and touched the edges of it, thinking somehow it had gotten stuck to him. But no. It was flush against the flesh of my baby's back, hard brass grown seamlessly into soft, pink skin. My mind was reeling, torn between confusion and fear and the growing realization that Herbie still hadn't woken up. That's when I noticed the small grey envelope jutting out from the triangle of the blanket nearby. Plucking it out, I felt the weight of something small and hard inside, and when I opened it, a thin silver coin tumbled out into my palm. Still in shock, I turned it over in my hand, studying it. One side was embossed with the face of a smiling woman crowned with a corona of sunlight. The other side showed the same woman, her thin face hard and sinister as she glared up at the moon. My eyes went back to Herbie, and then to the envelope, where I could see a thin line of cramped writing on the inside of the upper flap. This is better. It's coin-operated. I started to shudder, the envelope fluttering from my hand as I picked Herbie up again and began to rub his face and his arms, his legs and his feet, desperately crooning for him to wake up, to get up now. It was time to wake up and quit playing this joke. He just lay limply in my arms, purring that strange, rusty-sounding snore without stirring at all. I put him back down, tears blurring my vision as I tried to decide what to do. I should call 911. He must be sick, or I was crazy, and either way, we needed help. But what if this was real? And what if the coin fixed things somehow? I hadn't remembered dropping the coin, but after a moment of panic, I found it on top of the blanket, gleaming dully as I held it in my hand. This was all insane, like some kind of nightmare. But maybe, if I played the rules, I'd wake up and everything would be okay. So I turned Herbie back over and took down his onesie again. The coin slot was still there, cool to the touch and solidly real. Holding my breath, I put the coin up to the opening and dropped it in. There was a muffled clink, and then the whirring snore grew louder for a moment before turning into a yawning sigh. Herbie turned his head and tried to push himself over as he began to wake. I let out a gasp and picked him up, looking into his face and finding his eyes. He was looking back at me, his expression drowsy but interested as he gave me what might have been a slight smile. He was okay, and I was just messed up But no, the coin slot was still back there, and I could still hear the low-frequency whirring coming from inside him somewhere. Not the wet beating of a heart, but the dry orbits of some intricate clockwork. My skin went cold as I eased the thing back down into the crib. It tried to hold on to me, but I gently pushed its grasping hands away. I didn't know what this thing was, but it was my baby. Turning, I started out of the room. I'd get my phone and call Mom, and then I'd go looking for Herbie. Maybe he was still in the house, but I had the feeling he was gone. Someone had taken him and left that envelope, left that thing in. Daddy? I froze, turning slowly as Herbie's face peered at me over the edges of the crib. How was that possible? It would have had to jump several inches and pulled itself up onto the ledge, and Herbie was a long time from being able to form any words. Daddy. The tone was harder now, almost accusing, and my baby's face was drawing down into a pouting frown. I felt anger mixing with my fear as I took a step forward. I'm not your daddy. Whatever you aren't mine. The thing froze for a moment, and I had the thought that maybe it had broken or wound down. But its cheek jumped as it began to pull itself over the edge. I'm your baby. Grunting, it tugged its belly over the railing and flopped down onto the ground. Despite myself, I felt a moment of horrified panic that it had hurt itself. A moment later, the panic turned to terror as its limbs rotated with a whir and it flipped itself over and began to crab walk towards me. Come, hold me. I was backpedaling now, trying to close the door before it reached me, but it was too fast, leaping forward through the closing crack and landing on my chest. It squealed in my face with a sound like grinding gears as sparks glowed from somewhere down in its throat. Screaming, I grabbed it and slammed it against the wall and then the floor before kicking it away from me. The meat of it was ruined now, the fleshy covering ripped and torn in a dozen places to reveal bits of gleaming metal and coiled wire, gears and axles flailing disconsolately as their places in the orderly whole were disrupted and destroyed. It was dying now, but even still it called to me, crawling to me as it clicked together pink gums made of thin strips of beaten tin. Daddy, I'm your babe now. I was terrified to approach it, but my revulsion and rage was growing again, and I needed to make sure it was dead and stay that way. Darting forward, I stomped on it, once, twice, and then a final third time, and that's when the silver coin popped free from the mechanical ruin, rolling down the hole a few feet before sprawling and falling down, the evil face of the Moonlight Queen glaring up into the sky, or perhaps toward me. I was half crazy as I searched the nursery and then the house for Herbie. When I saw no sign of him, I called Mom, screaming and crying into the phone before hanging up. I'd upset her, but it couldn't be helped. She sounded as confused as I was, but I felt sure she'd call the police like I asked. I had other things to do. I'd had the thought that I could go back and look at the recorded footage from the baby monitor, see what had happened to Herbie and when. My hands were shaking as I picked it up from beside the bed and tapped on the screen. It always kept the last 24 hours, so I jumped back 10 hours and then started fast forwarding through the footage. I found what I was looking for at 3:15. A pair of small figures appeared from the shadows in the far corner of the room. There was no door or window there, so I wasn't sure where they'd really come from, but I was more concerned with what they were doing. Helping each other up, they pulled themselves over into the crib. One of them scooped up Herbie as the other was opening a dark sack and pulling his replacement out onto the bed. Weeping, I watched as Herbie began to wake and struggle, a tiny furred hand covering his mouth before he could let out a frightened wail. The other had placed the blanket over the fake and was now opening up the sack again, even as the one holding my baby stuffed Herbie inside. In a moment, they were back over the side of the crib and gone into the dark. I dropped the monitor onto the bed and ran back into the nursery to check it. Maybe there was a hole in the wall or a secret door, something I could use to follow wherever they had taken my baby. I just needed to check every inch of the nursery. Except it wasn't a nursery anymore. The room was bare. No crib, no toys or changing table, no stacks of books or rocking chair. Even the walls were the stark grey they'd been when I first moved in 2 years ago. How was any of this happening? Stumbling back into the hall, I saw that the ruined baby thing was gone too. There was no sign of its broken bits or torn disguise. There was no sign of anything, not even the coin. My heart leapt as I saw it, still dully gleaming from its resting place on the carpet. The woman's face still harsh and displeased in the silver moonlight of some distant night. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that it was proof. Proof of what had happened. Proof that someone had taken my Herbie. I let out a small scream as the doorbell rang. The police. They were here, and I could show them the coin and the video, and they'd help me get my baby back. When I opened the door, I saw it was Mom instead, her face drawn and pale as she looked at me. Are you all right? I stared at her, incredulous. Of course not. They took him, and we have to get him back. Did you call the cops? Her face drew down further into a frown. No, I didn't. You weren't making any sense. You were talking about a baby? What baby? Stepping back, I felt a chill run up my spine. My baby, Herbie, they took him. She followed me inside, shaking her head slightly. Baby? I don't know what you're talking about. You don't have a baby. You never have. I could barely breathe. That's not true. I have a baby, little Herbie. What's wrong with you? I started to cry again. They took him and tried to trick me or trade with me. They gave me a little mechanical baby that looked like him, but it wasn't him, and then it attacked me. And then I saw them take him, and the room was a nursery, but now it's not. And I need you to know this. I need you to remember and help me find him. My mother stepped forward and swept me up in a hug, stroking my hair as I wept against her shoulder. There. I think you're sick, honey. We need to get you some help. It'll be okay. I wrapped my arms around her neck, but now I started to recoil. How could she not remember him? I was still pulling away when my fingertips brushed something against the back of her neck. It was a coin slot. I froze, staring at her as she smiled at me, her eyes jumping slightly to the left and right as she watched me, holding me tighter with the soft, ratcheting ticks of some internal metronome. This is better. Just accept it. She was too strong for me to push away, so I dug into my pocket instead, found the coin that rested there, caressing the queen's cheek as I pulled it free and reached around its neck to the coin slot embedded into whatever it called a spine. I saw its eyes widened as I dropped the coin in, and then it began to scream. I was reading a book behind the counter as it began to rain. It was a slow day, and the calming sound of the weather outside only served to make me drowsier. The book was a detective thing with a dashing PI in search of a femme fatale that had been behind it all along. Predictable, but so good. I was watching the shop all on my own. We sold an array of cheap items. The things that went the fastest were oily chips and soda pops. This day, though, hardly anyone stopped in. The occasional ring of the bell attached to the glass door would rouse me from my half-reading, half-sleeping stupor. Rain always made it that way. Dog-earing the page, I moved to the other side of the counter, taking stock of the snacks we had on display there. A bag of Cheez-Its was calling my name. I hunkered down to pull the bag off the lowest peg and pry the glue at the top apart, dumping 2 or 3 of the crackers into my mouth. I could always pay for them later. Chomping on them while scanning the entirety of the general store, I could see that there was someone towards the rear of the store where the bathrooms and the manager's office was. It was a woman. Funny, I'd not seen her enter. Her hair was frizzy. Even from a distance, I could make out the freckles beneath her clear, water-blue eyes. The alarm bells that were going off were far and away so that they blended in with the background noise. Maybe a manifestation of my brain and nothing more. I was immediately enamored by her. I watched her scan a rack of newspapers or magazines. She lifted one of the thin books as I put a Cheez-It up to my mouth, nibbling it slowly without thinking. The crunch must have travelled the distance between us, because she looked up from the words on the page to me. Surely I was looking at her like a Shakespearean admirer, but the way it probably came across was that I was staring her down with bug eyes as I salivated over a handful of cheesy miniature saltines. She turned back to her magazine and lifted it so that it covered her face. Good job, me. I removed myself from the spot and returned to the register, trying my absolute best not to look in the direction of the woman. Lifting the book, I'd been reading about the detective and the femme fatale. I held the book so it seemed I was reading the words within. Just above the edge of the cover, I spied her. She flipped through the magazine she was holding before dropping it on the rack from where it had come. She approached the counter, and I set the book in my hand to the side, giving her my full attention. This woman, she had the eyes of a jungle cat, like she could reach across the counter and tear me to pieces in a second. Part of me wanted that. I cannot fathom why. I'm telling you, I might as well have jumped onto the counter and showed my whole red ass like a manic primitive baboon. She saw right through me as she popped the Faygo onto the counter. No accounting for taste, I reckon. You'd be cute. She reached across the counter, pointing her index finger at me, grazing the end of my nose with it. If you were a bit taller. I flinched. She withdrew her finger. The Faygo bottle was gone. Had she taken it when I wasn't paying attention? The sway of her hips hypnotized me as she left the store. I swallowed hard. What the hell did she mean? If I was taller? I was 5'11". Not huge by any means, but not short. Weird. For the remainder of the day, there were no more customers. The rain kept them at bay, it seemed. I was infatuated, hoping she would turn up the following day. I took the trash out after locking the glass door. As the motion sensor light around me came alive, the rusty green dumpster was bathed in a soft glow. I tossed the black bag in and examined the paper-strewn parking lot idly as I lit a cigarette. I stood still. The overhead light shut off, and I was left with nothing more than a small cherry glow off the end of my cigarette. As I puffed, I could barely make out the sound of a strange shifting popping sound. It was like the noise came from everywhere all at once, and yet there was no place it could have originated. I twisted around. The sensor light sprang on again, and I was left standing there in the spotlight, searching in all directions for the unknown sound. Feeling foolish, I ducked out the cigarette and tossed it in the dumpster. Sliding into the driver's seat of my compact, I had to adjust the seat. I live alone. No one uses my car but me. It was probably just the components in the seat coming loose or something. I prayed the engine alive and pulled out of the parking lot. When I arrived home, I was uncharacteristically tired, and my back was sore. No doubt, This was due to leaning down stock shelves, right? I sat on my bed, switching on the TV so I felt less alone. My shoes were tough to get off, so I loosened the laces. There comes a time with everything where you must face the facts, no matter how surreal. Her words came back to me. I'd be cute if I were taller. I knew, even then, I think, what was happening, but my mind went to the possible, the likely. My shoes were cheap, so they shrank from the moisture of the rain. I kicked back in my bed and covered myself in a light sheet. With the oscillating fan going in the corner, the TV muttering to me from the wall at my feet, and the phone screen in front of my face, I nearly had enough stimuli to forget who I was, the woman I'd met, the crummy job I had. Sleep came the way it always does for me, without warning. The sound of the TV I'd left on during the night was the first thing I noticed. The next thing was that I felt extraordinarily uncomfortable in bed. Had I slept wrong? I tossed around, feeling my feet hang clear off the bed. Blinking my eyes open, in the meager daylight spilling through the window near the bed, I scanned the room. The dull glow of the TV illuminated my bare feet. Instinctively, I pushed myself up on the bed till my head struck the headboard. When I craned forward, I felt the sheet was hardly clinging to me as I scooted from the bed. My feet touched the floor too soon. I looked around in a daze, moving to yank over the blinds of the window. It was the strangest of moments, me sitting there, staring down at my legs. In the night, they developed red strands along my calves and thighs. I examined the strands more closely. I could see that there were places the skin had been pulled to extreme lengths over a short period of time. They were tender to the touch. They were stretch marks. How was it that I developed a post-prepubescent growth spurt overnight? Then the woman's voice echoed in my head. I'd be cuter if I were only taller. What a messed up thing to say to someone, if I'm being honest. I angled myself on my stilted legs. Trying to walk on them was strange, like the bones were too long. I reached with an arm and could easily touch the ceiling without even getting on my tiptoes. The stretch marks were there on my arms too. Sore. I was sore all over. There was the dull, numbing sort of pain that came with having my bones grow inches in the night. But there was that stinging sensation across my flesh too, and I was forced to wonder, not for the first time, whether or not my muscles were tearing beneath my pinkish skin. I forced myself not to think of that, ducking into the bathroom. Sitting on the toilet, with my feet rested in the shower, I hoped and prayed that my internal organs were still relatively positioned where they'd been the night before. The last thing I wanted was to turn around and see that my whole gut had prolapsed into the bowl. No, Christ, I couldn't be thinking like that. That wasn't the sort of mentality I needed if I were to wake from this nightmare. I shifted to look into the mirror with my giraffe neck. It was hard for me to do, even while seated on the toilet. My cheeks had grown extremely gaunt, and my face no longer looked like a face, but a plasticine approximation. I wiped. There was blood, but I dare not look back there. I rose from the seat, and as my legs awkwardly caught against the shower wall and my waist twisted just so, the sound of something like bones grinding echoed. It was too late to save myself from what came next. I pulled my knees up to my neck and twisted around on the seat as I pivoted. The skin along my hip tore open, and fresh, warm blood ran the length of my long thigh. A low moan escaped my ghost in the house. It took me a moment to realize the ghost was me. I leveled myself aboard the stick legs, clawing my way from the bathroom like a bow-legged creepypasta monster. Do not ask me why, but a thought occurred to me then. How long would it be before my skull reached the size of a mammoth's? What then of my eyes? Would they fall clean out of my face, dangling from optic nerves like some peculiar funhouse dummy? Or would they merely roll backwards into the wide crevice my skull had become? I shook this from my mind and moved to the bedroom. I looked at my clothes, sitting in a pile on the floor. Thankfully, I sleep naked. I don't think I'd have the spirit to tear my breeches off. I craned down and lifted the pair of jeans lying there. As I held them up to my new legs, I could see there was no way I'd be able to put them on. I knew that, though. I looked at the sheets of my bed. Togas were an option, I suppose, at least for now. Looking at the tear on my hip was difficult. The skin had fallen away into a neat sheet that dangled off my side, flapping. I crawled out of my bedroom on my hands and knees, loosely wrapped in my bedsheets. As I came to the kitchen, I haphazardly threw the drawers open, searching for duct tape. All I found was a clear roll. I laid the flap on my hip out as straight as I possibly could. This was harder than it should have been, as I'd grown since then, and the dead skin no longer came up to the point it had torn away from. I taped it down as best as I could, so that I would not bleed everywhere. I crawled out of the house, and once outside, I could once again stand fully. Without a doubt, I wasn't one to clean the gutters, but I never thought in a million years they would be as full of pine needles as they were. I staggered towards the car, though I'm not sure why. It's not as though I'd fit into the old rust bucket anymore. At least I could walk to work faster this way. I chuckled at this, then found myself crying, walking down the suburban street towards the general store. One thought was burned into my mind. I was going to find that woman that had cursed me. I was going to confront her. And what exactly? Beg her to change me back? Strangle her on sight? I hadn't decided. As the grass turned into sidewalks, I passed by people. An older man with wispy hair running along the opposite side of the street in a set of sweats caught a glimpse of me and booked it in the opposite direction. I don't blame him. I looked a mess. I passed by a mother and a small boy, lumbering like an ogre. They stared up at me with wide open mouths, unable to move, frozen in fear. The little boy's mouth moved to say the words, "He's so gross." This did little for my self-confidence, I can tell you that much. Their horrified expressions nearly brought me to my knees. How would it look for a giant to fall into the street, sobbing? I've seen the Hollywood pictures. They'd line up the police cars and point their rifles at me. Maybe they'd cast some up-and-coming child star opposite to me to teach the kiddies about acceptance of difference. But I'd be captured. How would they even cuff me? Do they have a pair my size? My stomach was spinning, and I hope that's just a figure of speech. Given the excess room, that may be physically possible. My legs were like freshly debarked evergreen limbs, wobbly and inexcusably bowing out from my grown weight. I was sweating, surely, but as I lifted a wayward makeshift toga flap to dab at the moisture on my face and pulled it away, I could see it was quickly staining itself red. It was coming out of my pores as they were stretched to the limit. I could feel it. I was getting so tired, whether it be from moving a body so large or from losing the blood. I couldn't tell you. Why did this have to happen to me? Why did she do this to me? What did I ever do to deserve this? Mr. Fantastic seemed like a pretty rad superhero when I was a kid, but I can tell you now that he's BS. I came to the general store and stilted across the dirty parking lot, stepping over a car that braked hard as it did so. Briefly, I caught the expression of the woman in the cab of the vehicle, shocked. Then she remembered choosing a car and honked. I didn't have the energy to shoot at the middle finger. My legs waved over to the general store, and I sat my hand against the edge of the roof, attempting to catch my breath. "Is that you, Jason?" I looked around on the ground for the voice. It was my boss, an older guy. His belly bulged out from beneath his tucked shirt, and his tie caught in a breeze. The same wind caught my toga, lifting it. "Oh." My boss put up his palm and looked away. "Cover yourself." I pushed the yoga down. My voice creaked out. I could feel my vocal cords like torn rubber bands. "Help me." I took a knee, careful not to scrape my paper-thin skin, and shuffled myself to a sitting position with my back to the general store's exterior wall. "I think I'm dying." My boss's mustache wiggled on his upper lip as he looked me over. "What the hell is this? What happened to you?" I shook my head, choking back tears. "I don't know." But that wasn't true. I knew what was happening. I'd been cursed by some weird voodoo woman that had an affinity for tall guys. "There's a woman here," said my boss. My heart dropped. "What?" I was whimpering as I spied him through a kaleidoscopic weeping. She's been waiting for you all morning. There she was. She came strolling out of the general store, hair all frizzy and wonderful freckles to die for. What a knockout. What a witch. I moved to reach out at her with my taut, jointed fingers, but my arms fell weak to my side. She was sipping on a Faygo as she approached me and my boss along the storefront. Oh no, she said. That's far too tall. She shook her head and took another sip of her Faygo. No good at all. What? I cried. I don't know. I've never been much good at this sort of thing. It's more of an art than a science, really. So, I'm sorry about that. My boss eyed her over, giving her a wide berth as she directly approached my massive leg. She ran a finger along one of the open wet lengths, and the stinging sensation electrocuted my brain. I shivered, trying to get myself under control. You have to change me back, I said. You can't just do this to somebody and expect to get away with it. Oh, you poor thing. She puckered her lips at me. Another sip from a Faygo bottle followed. Don't you understand? I've already gotten away with it. Who's going to believe you? As she said this, I heard the shifting sound of bones again, and was met with a splitting headache. I was certain that my damn brain was rolling around in my skull like one of those bouncy balls you get from the quarter machines and lose after an hour of playing with it. My boss nervously puckered the edges of his mustache. When she turned her attention to him, he flinched. He was shaking. He should have done more than that, though. He should have run from us. He should have gotten into his car and gone home. But he did not. He stood in awe as the woman approached him with her index finger pointed outward. She poked him in the belly, as though he were the damn Pillsbury Doughboy. You'd be cuter, if you lost a few pounds. She walked down the street, out of sight. Just like that. No goodbye, no nothing. He turned and looked at me, dumbfounded. I know I'm a little round in the middle, but I'm not morbidly obese, right? He asked. I laughed till I cried like a madman. It hurt. The group of us stood around the mechanical atrocity with bated breath and blank expressions. The twisted roots of cords and wiring sprawled the room tight like some twisted bird's nest. On the display board, a vibrant array of flickering lights performed their usual rounds as we all waited in eager anticipation. The performance ceased several seconds later, and a single message displayed on screen. Dr. Ammerman approached, and her curious hazel eyes parted like the Red Sea as her focus fell upon the message. She turned back to face Marek, our project lead. His grey eyes returned her stare with a gaze of laser-like intensity. Status? Ammerman takes a deep breath and shudders. Genome sequencing complete. Electrolysis fluctuation appears minimal. Power levels stable. She pauses and glances meekly back at him. I think it'll work. She spoke as if it was some deadly secret. Marek looked into the two glass testing canisters on the podium, and the rest of us followed suit. Within the right, a single white mouse with beady red eyes curiously squeaked about. Within the left was another mouse, mortally wounded, with an open gash on its side. Small squeaks of pain escaped its frantic mouth, and its chest pulsed wildly as speckles of blood stained its pearly white fur. Two diodes sat at opposite ends of each container, with poles facing one another at a 180-degree angle. Wires wrapped the room like a spider's web, with several haphazardly soldered connections and open circuits. OSHA would have had a field day with our setup, but beauty and proportionality were never top priority. Marek pondered in silence for a moment, and anticipation draped over us like a thick tarp. With a sudden grunt, Marek gives the command. Begin. Ammerman and another colleague spring into action, adjusting knobs and dials on the machine in accordance with specified parameters. The machine began to whir with electromagnetic energy and groaned as the antennae began to glow. Ammerman grabbed the power switch and gave a sudden, much more confident look back to the rest of us. Her eyes wandered to Marek, then locked with mine. I nodded back, and she turns to the switch. Firing! Ammerman activates the machine, and the room is bathed in a blue, iridescent hue as energy surged through the circuits. The testing chamber was consumed momentarily by a radiant ocean of azure. Within 10 seconds, it is over, and the room waits silently for the culmination of years of hard work. There had been thousands of attempts and thousands of failures. That time, though, something felt different. Whether it was a simple blithe hunch or the ever so slight smirk on Dr. Ammerman's face, something was unique that time. A commotion drew us back to the canister in between the two diodes. A squeaking sound. I stared in abstract belief as the previously injured mouse begins to rummage around its cage, showing no signs of discomfort or the previous wound. The mouse on the right, however, has been almost liquefied, reduced to a small pile of fluffy slag like a moldy marshmallow that has just been microwaved. A chorus of cheers then erupts from the group, all of them reveling in the majesty of what had just been accomplished. Marek, however, does not join in on the celebratory chorus. Without a word, he approaches the canister and kneels to its level. His eyes follow the mouse within as it squeaks and scurries about. After a few moments, he chuckles and fetches something from his coat pocket. His arm pulls back, wielding a small pocket knife. He presses the blade to his hand and slices horizontally across the outside of his hand. The skin splits apart, and a deep crimson begins to drip voluptuously from the wound. He doesn't so much as flinch. Ammerman gasps at the macabre display. Her eyes quiver as the blood trickles from Marek's hand and falls to the pearly white linoleum below. She takes a step towards him, but then hesitates. Marek removes the canister and grabs the small rodent, placing it into the canister on the right with its deceased counterpart. He places his wounded hand between the two diodes as the rest of us closely monitor his actions. He looks back to Ammerman, expression devoid of any emotion. Begin. Ammerman appears unsure of the command. Another voice, Dr. Fedor Oleski, chimes in. Sir, the proper diagnostics have not yet been completed. We don't know what. Pull the switch. Marek interrupts with a stern yet collected voice. His eyes glisten with a malicious urgency. In fear of further invoking his wrath, Ammerman complies with the order. The machine roars to life once again as the blood from Marek's hand pulls upon the pulpit below the diodes. Ammerman again grabs the switch and looks to me. A simple nod signals my approval, as, even if I wanted to protest, I know there is no sense arguing with my older brother. She pulls the switch, and a stream of electricity blazes through Marek's hand. The room is once again illuminated by a neon blue. Marek winces for a moment, but remains stoic as the process concludes. The machine powers down seconds later, and tufts of smoke drift from Marek's hand. Smoke, but no blood. The previous wound had vanished, the only proof of it having ever existed being the pool of partially congealed blood on the testing podium. The previously healed mouse has been reduced to viscera, just as its counterpart before it. Marek withdraws his hand and raises it upwards into the faux lighting of the lab. He wiggles his fingers back and forth, and a small chuckle escapes his lips. The group, myself included, stare back in amazement as Marek turns to us, a wide, almost devious grin on his haggard face. Now I can become life, the creator of worlds. That moment should have been triumphant, celebratory for all of us at the impossibility that had been achieved. But the way Marek spoke was not one of just victory, it was one of conquest. One reminiscent of a medieval warlord bloviating to a fallen adversary who dared challenge his valor just before thrusting the blade through his chest. Marek's words, a blatant mockery of the illustrious J. Robert Oppenheimer, and a tabernacle solidifying his greatest achievement. Once again, there was no sense arguing with him. My older brother Marek has always been an eccentric man, dead set in his ways, and near impossible to convince otherwise. Anything and everything he does wholeheartedly and without lamentation, giving every ounce of energy he has to achieve that which he desires. It's one of the reasons why he has become a wealthy man, but not the only one. So, when he had first approached me, proclaiming he wished to orchestrate a method capable of reversing the entire deluge of human ailments, I did question him. Not on the intent, anyways. I knew immediately he was serious. I pledged my funding to this group, curious to see what his plan was. For over a decade, we had nothing but failure. The initial machine relied on stimulant chemicals to try and expedite the body's natural healing processes. That idea was scrapped fairly early on, in favor of an electrolysis generator capable of completely overriding the body's own control of the cerebral cortex and manually initializing tissue rejuvenation. It restores the neural pathways and stimulates red and white blood cell production to rapidly reverse ailments of a host specimen. At least, that's about as much as I understand about the process. That was not enough, though. We ran the experiment hundreds of times and achieved little else than searing the subject like a patty on the grill. Eventually, though, a breakthrough did come. We realized the only way to generate enough power was by a transfer of energy from one living organism to another. No amount of raw electrical input was enough. A sacrifice had to be made. The occupants of the room file out of the lab one by one at the conclusion of the experiment, many of them bearing concern, but with nonetheless excited expressions. Several gossip with one another on the way out, but most remained silent. Ammerman was one of the last to leave, and avoided looking at either my brother or I as she departed. Soon enough, it is just Marek and I, alone in the room. "We've done it, Leo," he proclaims proudly. I turn to see him, and slowly he meets my gaze, a devious smile on his face. Death can no longer hold us. Injury no longer restrict us. We alone have achieved the impossible. I can't help but chuckle at his brooding monologue and almost maniacal tone. That's a bit presumptuous, wouldn't you say? We traded a quarter of a megawatt for a mouse and a scrape. Not exactly energy efficient. Marek inspects his previously injured wrist, caressing it gently with his other hand. It never is in the beginning. This is just the first iteration. The process will be refined in the coming years, as it always is, and our names will be forever solidified into the annals of history. He turns entirely to face me, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. Can you picture it, Leo? Our names to the top of the list of prestigious men of science. Newton, Tesla, Franklin, Einstein. None can compare to what we have achieved. Mankind will no longer fear death. He pauses and takes a moment to revel in his self-bestowed accolades. Safe to say, the Nobel is ours for the next century. He and I share a laugh. Well, why stop there? I'm thinking big. Maybe a giant golden statue by the Washington Monument or something. Marek laughs, a genuine and hearty laugh that I have not heard him utter in years. That would be nice. Not since aspirin has the world seen something so profound. And when the world discovers what we have done, they will know true greatness. My brother is a bit of a megalomaniac, I know, but honestly, he's at least partially justified. I know it can rub people the wrong way, and I get that. But after all, we have accomplished what he has said. His machine, which he has so humbly dubbed as the Godsbane engine, has given us dominion over injury, and soon, death itself. This lab, this project, has all been orchestrated and funded solely by us. None in the mainstream world could be convinced to so much as entertain so outlandish an idea, but they're sure to be kicking themselves now. So, what now? What do you plan on doing with it? Marek falls silent again. He gives me a look that I have not seen in him. It's hard for me to quantify what expression conveys. A sorrowful look with a unique gleam in the eye. The type of look that says, you and I both know the answer to that. The last time I remember seeing it was when our mother passed away. It's for her, he responds simply. For a second, I thought he was referring to Ammerman, who I know he fancies privately to some extent. I turn to respond, but an epiphany strikes before I can speak. Beatrice? I ask. He doesn't respond, only maintains the same look. That's what all of this was for, isn't it? It's why you are so insistent upon this project? Not just this, Leo. Everything I have ever done, it's all for her. He stares back up at the machine, arms crossed and mind drifting from the moment. Marek, I don't know if it'll work that way, I add sheepishly. I know that breaking through this stubborn mental wall around him is almost futile. You'd have better luck convincing a crocodile to go vegan. Still, I have to try. It was made to work that way. You know that better than anyone. What is fixing a simple genetic abnormality when compared to saving the fatally wounded? Adjustments can be made. His glance turns almost contemptuous. It's not just abnormality. We're talking a lifetime of maldeveloped biology. Not just her mind, her body, her hands and feet. She wouldn't be able to handle the procedure. Then it would be better to let her die, would it? Merrick suddenly shouts back. I've seen him furious before, but rarely is his ire directed solely at me. I can tell by the frenzied look in his eye that he is desperate. I am as well, of course. Beatrice is the most important thing in the world to me, but I have to be realistic. He steps closer. We are running out of time, Leo. She has already far exceeded the average lifespan of someone with her condition. Her life has been nothing but torment, restricted by the cruel hands of fate. Would you be able to live with yourself if you knew there was something you could have done and didn't? I don't answer his question. instead choosing to avert my gaze to the ground. Marek steps away and takes a deep breath. This is what we've always wanted. This is no longer just our investment. This is now our duty. To abandon now would be absolute treachery. She deserves everything we can give her. I struggle to find a retort to his words, partly because I know him to be correct on some level. From the initial onset of our project, I suspected this was about her. The way Marek insisted upon utilizing cerebral cortex revitalization and the use of the neural electroencephalogram betrayed his true motives. This was always about her, and everything we did was to prepare us for it. What was I to do? Allow her to suffer and succumb to the sands of time when we hold the holy grail in our palms of our hands? Marek is right. It has to be done. There is no guarantee she will be able to handle the procedure. Marek's expression doesn't waver an inch at the suggestion. There is no guarantee of anything. When has that ever stopped us? It's clear he has already rehearsed this exact moment, and I know nothing I say will dissuade him. It's going to take a lot of energy, probably a few megawatts, not to mention donors equivalent to at least 5,000 grams of glutamate. Marek shifts in his stance and eyes me. Better do 6, just to be sure, he replies. That's a lot of animals, I reply. Marek nods, unheeded by the obstacle. You leave that to me. For now, tell the crew to prepare for the procedure. Call me if anything else should arise. I got some things to take care of. Marek turns and begins to exit the lab. I stare up at the Godsbane and contemplate the task awaiting us. How do you plan on generating that much electricity? I ask. Marek pauses as he reaches the door, and without turning, he responds, a demonstration. Beatrice is Marek and I's younger sister, a beautiful, happy girl of only 21 years old, with short, curly brown hair and a smile which could turn the most bitter of hearts into saints. Mom always used to tell us that you do not receive a gift without a curse. For Beatrice, I see no gift worth that of the curse she bears. Her condition comes in the form of an insidious birth defect known to the medical world as lissencephaly, a spiteful neurological disease characterized by the absence of convulsions in the cerebral cortex. It results in an underdeveloped brain, smaller than normal cranium, mental impairment, and severe motor skill inhibition. The person diagnosed with the disease will forever be unable to fend for themselves, becoming completely dependent upon those who care for them. They are locked in an infantile existence and cannot ever lead normal lives. And, as I'm sure you can imagine, there is no cure. Beatrice does not walk, she does not talk, but her smile says everything you ever need to hear. The prospect of her being born the way she was never sat well with Marek. I know he's been devastated by it, but I had no idea the extent of his disdain. We've always done our best to provide Beatrice with a modicum of comfort, but there's only so much that can be done to abate the grand mal seizures and perpetual sickness. Resentment of life is a standard ploy to distract from the possibility of malicious design from an apathetic creator. It's one of the many reasons I no longer attend church. The necessary adjustments have been made by the team. All the wires and circuits need to be beefed up in order to handle the amplified amount of power which would flow through them. The exit diodes also need readjustment in order to allow space required to accommodate a human specimen. Now is our time to seize Mother Nature by the throat. A plethora of businessmen and women, Prestigious scientists and engineers, along with wealthy philanthropists and CEOs, file into the room to witness our presentation. Their expressions dotting with a mix of uncertainty and doubt. I do not know what they have been told, but I know nothing can prepare them for what they are about to see. After a half hour of meager conversation and questions, Marek finally enters the room. Silence befalls the group as he strolls confidently to the front of the lab. He pauses and turns, his Godsbane engine looming behind him in all its blasphemous glory. He clears his throat and begins. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all to our humble laboratory. Before you stands a revolutionary new type of machine, one which can reverse disease, heal injury, and save people from the brink of death. I give you the Godsbane engine. He pauses and gestures up to the mechanical leviathan behind him, its form now appearing less like a machine and more like an altar. He is met with a round of hesitant applause from the 50-odd guests in attendance. Today, ladies and gentlemen, you will witness a miracle, an absolute marvel of technology, and the very first of its kind. A hand suddenly sprouts upward from the audience, a balding white man with glasses and a curious demeanor. Marek nods to him. This machine, it can reverse death? He asks skeptically. Marek nods, and the man seems to contemplate a moment. Is that wise to do? Morally speaking, how do you think the world will react if what you claim is true? Marek pauses for a moment before a knowing smile slithers across his face. It's not a question of morality, it's a question of reality. Science and medicine has always tampered with order. We have a duty to our fellow man to push the envelope. We always have. It is our burden to bear. Marek stands confidently, and no one else seems willing to question his resolve. I look around the room and suddenly come to the realization that Dr. Ammerman is not present. None of the crew is, as a matter of fact. Only Marek's personal guards, whom I do not recognize. Another hand then sprouts up from a woman with gilded hair and wrinkles beneath her eyes. How exactly does it work? Marek smiles, as if that was the question he was waiting to hear. Easier to show than it is to tell. Marek gestures to his men, and they begin ushering people towards the seats. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you would be so kind as to take your seats, we are about to begin. The audience does as instructed and relocates into the crude metallic seats. They look almost like thrones, but barebone and rigid. Marek's men then begin passing out some sort of helmet device to each of them. My assistants are supplying you with our state-of-the-art shielding apparatus. The arc flash produced by the machine can be quite intense, and this device is to protect your eyes from the lighting. Please ensure your helmet is equipped, snug and comfortable, with the protective lenses placed across your eyes. The audience begins doing as requested, and Marek's guards assist them. I saunter over to his side and whisper to him, You made no mention of this before. Marek chuckles and replies in a hushed tone, Insurance purposes, to cover our ass from any lawsuit they may try to bring. He gives me a pat on the back and turns back to the group as they finish their preparations. Marek raises both hands and begins again. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the show is about to begin. Please welcome the star of our show, my beloved younger sister, Beatrice. The door opens behind him, and those seated turn to glimpse the commotion. In strolls Dr. Hammerman, pushing Beatrice in a wheelchair. Beatrice smiles as she recognizes Marek. but Ammerman appears nervous. Marek approaches Beatrice and kneels to her level. Hi, Bee. A smile forms on his face, and he kisses her forehead. Beatrice gives a small hoot of excitement and eagerly squirms about. Ammerman steps away and appears confused by the sight of the audience in their bizarre helmets. She turns to me. Oh, insurance, I state, echoing Marek's explanation. Ammerman appears no less confused and glances around the room. Where are the animals? She asks. I forgot all about that aspect, and I have no answer to give. Before I can respond, Marek begins to speak once again. I'd like to introduce you all to my dear sister, Beatrice. She was born with a disease known as lissencephaly, a cruel diagnosis which has left her incapable of living a full life. That changes today. With a Godsbane engine, she will be free from her shackles. Marek nods to Ammerman, but she remains frozen. Marek's gaze quickly turns sour, and Ammerman, fearing repercussions, approaches and pushes Beatrice and her wheelchair to the designated spot, right between the two output diodes, in the crux of the Godsbane. Beatrice's expression appears somewhat nervous as she is placed within the designated spot. I walk over to her, give her a kiss on the forehead, and try reassuring her. It's okay, Bee. We're gonna make things better. Beatrice smiles up at me, and Marek readies the machine for the procedure. Ammerman shuffles quietly behind the machine and stands at the switch. Her eyes appear to tremble as she scans the room. Marek approaches Beatrice and gently caresses her hand. He whispers something to her, but I didn't hear what he said. Marek then turns from her and meets my gaze with an almost diabolic grin. I feel a cold chill descend my spine as I see his expression. But Marek will not be swayed. He turns to Ammerman. Begin. Ammerman hesitates. Sir, where are the... It has all been taken care of, Dr. Ammerman. There is no need to worry. But what about begin the procedure? His look turns to an immediate scowl, as if the scorn of 1,000 men rested behind his eyes. Ammerman recoils, and with a sigh, she begins the startup process. The generators begin to whir with electrical impulse, a noise that grows steadily louder. Overhead, the armature begins to rotate faster and faster as sparks of neon blue begin to ignite and lash out. The whirring becomes so loud that Marek is forced to shout over the commotion. The first step requires building enough power for a sustainable transfusion. Once the core is stable and power levels are primed, the next step begins. The audience appears slightly unnerved by the sight, and the ferocious machine continues to roar overhead. Marek then throws another switch, and a series of mechanical straps emerge from the seats. They jut across the lap of the audience members and restrain them down in their seats. Fear crosses their faces, and several begin to audibly protest. Marek raises his hand to quell the mounting uncertainty. All part of the plan, ladies and gentlemen. There is no need to worry. This is a precaution for your safety. Overhead, a series of tube-like structures descend from the rafters and latch themselves to the helmets of the audience members. Beatrice begins to cry as the cacophony of the machine reaches hurricane proportions. Marek, what are you... I question. Do not get in the way, Leo. He suddenly shouts in a hushed tone back at me, his eyes now burning holes through me as the restrained audience members begin to visibly panic. What is this? This wasn't part of the plan. Marek's expression turns to outright anger as the years of seething resentment can no longer be contained within him. This was always part of the plan. He turns from me once more and raises both arms. You see, ladies and gentlemen,
Raw electrical input is not enough. It is only part of the equation. To make the transfer successful, you need a small dose of life. Marek then throws the final switch, causing a new noise to fill the lab, the sound of horrendous screams. I watch horrified as the men and women strapped to the seats flail and writhe around as the tubes begin to glow brightly above them. Marek, stop! Ammerman begs, but Marek isn't listening. A new diabolic grin forms on his face, and I see the sheer madness swirl in his eyes. Ammerman moves to impede him when Marek forcefully seizes her by the throat. He hurls her backwards, causing her to stumble and bash her head on a nearby desk. She falls to the ground, unconscious. What the hell are you doing? I rush towards Ammerman when Marek seizes me. I feel his fist strike my ribs, and as I haunch over in pain, his knee rises to slam into my face. I feel my nose burst like a balloon, and a splatter of blood erupts from my nose. I feel my consciousness fading when Marek seizes me by the collar. Apologies, brother, but I cannot allow anyone to intervene, not even you. Behind me, I hear the continued sounds of gurgled screams from the audience. This is wrong, I manage to stutter out. Marek laughs and shakes his head. No, Beatrice is wrong. I will make her whole. Marek then releases me, and I fall back. My fading vision falls upon the audience. Their bodies and faces have begun to melt away, like candles in an oven. Their agonized screams and gurgles continue as one by one they fall silent. Outside, a group of their bodyguards attempt to pry the door open, but to no avail. The room begins to grow vibrantly as the neon blue grows to consume everything. It grows so bright that I can no longer see my hand in front of my face. Beatrice, I release you from your chains, Marek shouts, his voice overcoming all the rest of the chaotic symphony before the room erupts with a massive concussion of raw energy. I can feel the breath knocked from my chest and the room tremble as a wave strikes me. I gasp as I try to regain my rhythm, blinded by the light. The neon blue slowly fades, leaving a pile of partially liquefied corpses in its wake. All the audience members have since fallen silent, their slack-jawed expressions partially skeletonized as melted flesh drips from their bones. Marek stands back up on the other end of the room, his head now sporting a gaping wound. His eyes then grow enormous, and I turn to see what holds his attention. Beatrice sits in a wheelchair, smoke bristling off her like the vapor on a lake in a cold winter's day. Something about her has changed. Her skin has turned a ghostly white, as if it were carved from the most immaculate marble. Her head suddenly appears the size of a normal person's, as her arms and legs no longer bear the signs of muscular atrophy. She appears whole, as we had always hoped. Her blue jumpsuit she wore has been tattered and no longer seems to properly fit. Around her sprouts an almost angelic aura of shimmering light. The air distorts around her like heat waves on a hot summer day. Then, Beatrice does something I never would have thought I'd see in a million years. My little sister, who all her life had suffered from her ailment and has never taken a single step, rises from a wheelchair of her own accord. I stare, mouth gaping and eyes anchored open, as she strolls out of the Godsbane. Marek rises, his expression matching my own bewilderment. Beatrice, he says, almost in a whisper, and tears well in his eyes. Her head then turns in his direction, her eyes still shut. She stands at least an entire foot taller than him. Her body is lanky and narrow and seems to emanate an immense power beyond any I've ever witnessed. He strolls over to her, his hand gently reaching out. On the main lab door, the sound of men attempting to break in emerges, but Marek pays them no mind. Welcome home, sister. Marek's hand reaches for her cheek. Her eyes then spring open, revealing two blue orbs that glisten like stars. Marek pauses, then retracts his hand. Beatrice then reaches her hand towards him, and the security team manages to breach the door. Stop right there, one of the four men in suits commands. Beatrice slowly turns towards them, her glowing eyes falling upon the group. The men hold their pistols with trembling grips, and the one who shouted the command appears to shudder. Doctor, we need you to stand down, he commands, but his voice wavers. Marek pays him no mind whatsoever, as his gaze is transfixed upon Beatrice. Beatrice raises a hand to Marek and caresses his cheek gently. Marek grasps and suddenly appears uncertain. Within moments, his body begins to fade, like blood diluting in a bucket of water. One moment is there, the next is gone. One of the guards suddenly pulls the trigger, and a deafening blast erupts as the bullet screams out of the barrel. It strikes Beatrice in the chest, and my heart freezes. Blood begins to drip from the wound, but Beatrice doesn't even seem to register the impact. I expect her to collapse, as the shot should have been fatal, but she continues to stand. Beatrice then turns her head back to the men. Her mouth then slowly dangles open, stretching impossibly wide for any normal human. But she isn't a normal human anymore. Dozens of small tufts of blue light emerge from within her throat and begin to gently flutter outward. What the hell are you? One man asks. As if on cue, the balls of light suddenly jettison towards them in a torrid rate. The balls strike the men, one after another, and they begin to scream. They writhe about as their eyes, mouths, nostrils, and ears begin to emit the same blue light. They fall to the floor soon after, silent and unresponsive. I blink, and suddenly, Beatrice has appeared only 2 feet from me, her iridescent eyes staring down, expressionless upon me. I gasp and raise my arms, as if hoping in some futile attempt to protect myself. Beatrice, I'm so sorry. Hot and cold, dead and alive. I squirm as the uncomfortable sensation ingrains into my shoulder. I look back up to her, tears drifting from my eyes. Thank you, Leo. Her voice like smooth silk upon the rusted chassis of my heart. Her tone is one which infuses a pit of despair within me, but also hope. A feeling I can never truly describe properly. I shudder at the sight of her, as if I'm looking upon a living, breathing miracle. Not one of the powers of God, but one born of science and machines. A living goddess, transcendent beyond the human form. She turns away from me, eyeing the morbid scene around us. The godsbane has since fallen silent, and Ammerman begins to stir. She then gasps, and her eyes tremble as she beholds Beatrice in all her heretical glory. Beatrice only gives her a quick glance before slowly strolling towards the door of the lab. I watch her go, able to move, but without the willpower to follow. I watch her vanish beyond the mangled doors of the lab, unable to follow her out. I get my personal things together and get out of there as soon as I was able. The devastation of our audience took on an entirely new perspective as I leave, and I gag as the smell of viscera strikes my nostrils. The severity of what we had done hits me then. I can never atone for what I've done. Police seized our lab soon after, but the news made no mention of the event. By the time they arrived, I, and whoever else valued their freedom, were long gone. I have no idea what they truly know, but I doubt it is the whole story. No one would believe it anyway. They have, of course, tried to find me, but they haven't. I am a world away from that place now. New name and identity. I thought Merrick was dead after that, but I got a phone call from him not too long ago. He's out there somewhere, serving his new goddess. I haven't actually seen him or Ammerman since, but I have seen her. I dream about her almost every night. It's all fuzzy, but I know it's her. Our little princess, molded into something else. I see her creating, see her suffering, and see her crying. I don't know why she shows me the things she does, but I know what she's doing. She is building something, a world to call her own beyond that of her own. She's not human anymore. Not really. Perhaps vaguely in appearance, but her mind and power has gone far beyond that of any other. She's out there, using the power we bestowed upon her, and there is no stopping her now. A being of tragedy and love, of chaos and empathy. The Nightmare Princess, a goddess in her own right. She keeps taking people, and I cannot stop her. I'm sorry for what I've done, but I can honestly say I wouldn't have it any other way. She deserves to be free, and now she's freer than anyone else has ever been before. All hail Beatrice, the Nightmare Princess. And now, the real work begins.
For as long as I could remember, I've had the phrase, "you'll grow into a fine person," embedded into the back of my mind. For some reason, that made me look at life a bit differently than most. I was never worried about what kind of job I held down, or making any serious mistakes in my life. That one sentence was my truth. No matter what happened or what I did, as long as I was still alive, I would become a fine person. It was only recently I found out who told me that phrase and why I should have cared more about putting some sort of purpose to my life. I'd come into my money. On a whim, I bought a lottery ticket when I was at the corner store getting a cold drink. I had never actually bought a ticket for myself. I would go into lottery pools at work or buy some tickets for my family, but never one for myself. It was a bit out of character, but I never considered guessing why I bought it, even after I won. The amount was enough for me to live comfortably if I was careful with my spending. I could retire before my mid-20s, even after giving my parents a share so they could retire as well. I was never close with my parents, and I had no reason for the emotional distance. I love them, sure, but I can never bring myself to go out of my way to do things like meet up for family dinners or play catch in front of the yard with my father. They didn't seem too bothered with the distance. I was a fairly lonely person, very much the type to go missing and not have someone notice for 3 months. With my newly filled bank account, I decided first thing was to find a better place to live. My apartment wasn't in the best area, but it was affordable. Now I could afford a place with 6 16 bathrooms if I liked, but I figured that to be a waste if I was alone. I did some house hunting alone and found a nice place with a reasonable price. I hadn't even bothered getting a new car yet. I still owned a near the end of its life truck I bought for a few $100. It was good enough for me to get to the open house that day, but I never got to the location I picked out. Despite living in the same city my entire life, I got lost. I somehow ended up on a side street. It was a nice neighborhood, the sidewalks cracked, the area looking like it was stuck years in the past, but it was nice. Each front yard was huge, big enough to host a tree that towered over every other house. Although I had gotten lost, I felt like I knew this neighborhood. I slowly drove down the street, looking for a place to park, so I could use my phone to get directions to the open house. Because I was going so slowly, when a dog ran out into the weather-worn road, I was at no risk to hit it. From where the small dog came running, a child followed behind. She was calling after the dog, not watching where she was going. I had stopped my truck in the empty street and watched as the poor girl tripped over the curb, smashing a knee. She wailed for a dog and over a new scrape. Her father, I assumed, came running out from the house to go to her side. In a strange daze, I stopped my truck and got out. "Is she alright?" I called out. "She's fine. Did you see where our dog went?" the father asked after he picked up his sobbing daughter. I did see where the dog went. He had run down the driveway and I guessed into the backyard of the place across the street. "I'll try and find him," I offered and took off trying to track the small white dog down. The driveway ended in a gate that was ajar. I heard barking and hoped the owners forgave me for trespassing. It only took a minute or two to collect the dog and start back towards the road. But the owners of the house must have seen a stranger come into the backyard. A man came out onto the porch to see what the fuss was about, followed behind with a woman. "Sorry to go into your backyard. I just wanted to get him back," I apologized. They looked between each other, not looking worried exactly, but had a stressed look I couldn't place. I returned the dog to his owners, and the little girl stopped